When 72-year-old Margaret Caldwell found the first gift on her doorstep, she thought it was just another peculiar offering from the stray cat she'd been feeding. But as the mysterious gifts continued to appear each morning, she had no idea she was about to uncover a secret that would shake her quiet neighborhood to its core and change her life forever. It started on a foggy Tuesday morning in October. Margaret shuffled to her front door in her worn slippers, expecting to find nothing more than the morning newspaper. Instead, there on her welcome mat sat the orange tabby cat she'd been feeding for the past few weeks, with something glinting in his mouth. She had started calling him Orange for his beautiful golden brown coat, though she had no idea what his real name was or where he came from. He had simply appeared in her backyard one day, thin and skittish, and Margaret's soft heart couldn't resist leaving out food and water. "What have you brought me now, you sweet thing?" Margaret murmured, bending down to examine Orange's offering. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a dead mouse or a mangled bird. It was a small toy car, red and slightly scratched but well-loved. Orange dropped it at her feet with the pride of a hunter presenting his finest catch, then rubbed against her legs, purring loudly. Margaret picked up the toy car, turning it over in her weathered hands. It was the kind of thing a child might treasure, small enough to fit in a pocket but clearly important to someone. "Where on earth did you find this?" she asked Orange, who simply meowed and trotted toward the food bowl she kept on her back porch, apparently satisfied with his morning's work. Margaret assumed it was a one-time oddity. Perhaps the toy had fallen from some child's pocket during their walk to school, and Orange had simply been in the right place at the right time. But she was wrong. The next morning, another gift appeared. This time, Orange had brought her a small origami crane, carefully folded from colorful paper. The creases were precise, the work of someone who had taken time to learn the craft properly. A chill ran down Margaret's spine. 2 personal items in 2 days couldn't be a coincidence. On the third morning, Margaret was waiting by her front door before dawn, coffee mug in hand, determined to catch Orange in the act. She watched through her peephole as the cat approached the house just as the sun began to rise, something small and dark clutched in his jaw. When she opened the door, Orange deposited a folded piece of paper at her feet. Margaret's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Written in shaky handwriting were just 3 words, "Thank you, lady." Her heart began to race. Someone was watching her. Someone knew where she lived. Someone was using this cat as a messenger. But who? And why? Margaret lived alone on Maple Street, a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors kept to themselves and nothing exciting ever happened. She'd moved there 5 years ago after her husband Harold passed away, seeking the peace and solitude that came with a smaller community. She barely knew her neighbors beyond polite waves and the occasional borrowed cup of sugar. The gifts continued, each one more puzzling than the last. A smooth, flat stone painted with a simple flower design. A collection of bottle caps arranged in a small bag. Trading cards featuring cartoon characters she didn't recognize. Pressed flowers between pieces of wax paper. A small paper bookmark with a hand-drawn cat on it. With each discovery, Margaret's anxiety grew. She began to lose sleep, jumping at every sound outside her window. During the day, she found herself studying her neighbors with new suspicion. The Hendersons with their perfectly manicured lawn. Mrs. Vale, who always seemed to be peeking through her curtains. The new family that had moved in 3 houses down, with teenagers who played music too loud on weekends. Orange, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the chaos he was causing. He continued his morning ritual with the dedication of a postal worker, never missing a day, never failing to bring something new. 2 weeks into the mystery, Margaret received a gift that made her blood run cold. It was a hospital bracelet, the kind they put on patients when they're admitted. The name was mostly worn off, but she could still make out partial letters, SM, and what looked like 12 years. Someone young was in trouble. Someone who had been to the hospital recently. Someone who somehow knew Margaret and was trying to communicate with her through this stray cat. That night, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. She was going to follow Orange. At 3 a.m., Margaret dressed in her darkest clothes and positioned herself behind her living room curtains. She'd barely slept in days, but adrenaline kept her alert. She clutched a small flashlight in one hand and her cell phone in the other, though she wasn't sure who she would call if she found herself in danger. Just before dawn, she saw Orange emerge from the bushes near her back porch and begin his mysterious journey. Margaret crept out of her house and followed at a distance, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the entire neighborhood could hear it. Orange moved with purpose, padding silently down Maple Street, then turning onto Oak Avenue. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Margaret had lived in Elmwood Gardens for 5 years, but following Orange through the pre-dawn darkness, she saw her neighborhood with new eyes. Shadows that had never seemed threatening before now appeared ominous. Every rustle in the bushes made her jump. Every distant sound could be a threat. Orange led her 3 blocks away from her house, to a part of the neighborhood she rarely visited. The houses here were older, some in desperate need of repair. Overgrown yards and broken fences spoke of residents who either couldn't afford maintenance or had simply given up trying. The cat stopped at 247 Birch Lane, a house that looked neglected but not quite abandoned. The paint was peeling, the front yard was overgrown with weeds, and the windows were dark. A few pieces of mail peeked out from an overstuffed mailbox. But Orange didn't go to the house. Instead, he slipped through a gap in the backyard fence and disappeared into the shadows behind the property. Margaret hesitated. Following a stray cat down public streets was one thing, but trespassing on private property crossed a line she'd never crossed before. She thought of Harold, who had always been the brave one in their marriage. What would he do? He would want to help someone in need, she realized. Harold had never been able to ignore suffering, whether it was an injured bird or a neighbor struggling with their groceries. Taking a deep breath, Margaret squeezed through the same gap in the fence that Orange had used. The backyard was a jungle of neglected vegetation. Vines covered what had once been a garden shed, and fallen branches created an obstacle course that Margaret navigated with difficulty in the darkness. But there, barely visible through the overgrowth, she saw a faint light coming from the old garden shed. And she could hear voices. Margaret crept closer, her flashlight turned off, relying on the dim glow from the shed to guide her steps. The voices became clearer as she approached. One was definitely Orange's distinctive meow, but the other was human. Young. Male. "Hey, buddy," the voice whispered. "What did you bring me today?" Margaret's breath caught. Someone was living in the abandoned shed. Someone who knew Orange. Someone who was expecting him. She positioned herself behind an overgrown shrub where she could see through a crack in the shed's wooden wall. What she saw broke her heart. Before we continue, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. Inside the shed, illuminated by a small battery-powered lantern, was a young boy. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, with shaggy brown hair and clothes that had clearly seen better days. He was painfully thin, his cheekbones sharp in the lantern's glow. Orange was rubbing against the boy's legs, purring loudly, clearly comfortable and familiar with his surroundings. "Let's see what you've got for me tonight," the boy said softly, reaching into a small backpack that sat beside him. Margaret watched in amazement as the boy pulled out a small bag of what looked like crackers and ate a few himself, sharing some with the cat. But it was what happened next that made Margaret's eyes fill with tears. The boy carefully pulled out a small collection of items, some marbles, a few interesting buttons, and what looked like another origami figure. He selected one of the marbles, a clear glass one with swirls of blue inside, and placed it beside Orange. "Think you can take this to the nice lady for me?" he asked the cat. "She's been feeding you, hasn't she? I can tell you're getting better meals than what I can give you." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. The boy knew about her. He'd been sending Orange to her house on purpose. But why? The boy continued talking to Orange as if the cat could understand every word. "I wish I could thank her properly. She doesn't even know she's helping us both. You eat her food, and I get to keep you healthy and strong." The pieces began falling into place in Margaret's mind. The gifts weren't random at all. They were payments. This boy was trying to repay her kindness to Orange with the only things he had, his own small treasures. "I found these marbles in the park yesterday," the boy continued, scratching Orange behind the ears. "Someone must have dropped them. This blue one is really pretty. Maybe she'll like it." Margaret realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This young man, living in desperate circumstances, was teaching himself ethics that many adults never learned. Even with nothing, he was trying to give back. But who was he? How long had he been living in the shed? And why wasn't he at home with his family? As if reading her thoughts, the boy pulled out a small notebook and began writing by the lantern's light. "Day 42, he wrote, and Margaret could just make out the words from her hiding spot. "Still no word from Mom. Whiskers is doing good. The lady on Maple Street is still taking care of him during the day. I think he's gaining weight. 42 days. This child had been living in an abandoned shed for over 6 weeks. And now she finally understood. Orange wasn't a stray cat at all, and his name is Whiskers. He belonged to this boy. But the cat had found her, and somehow the boy had discovered this and decided to use Cat as a messenger of gratitude. Margaret's maternal instincts, dormant since her own children had grown up and moved away, suddenly roared to life. Every fiber of her being wanted to march into that shed and demand to know why this boy was alone, why he wasn't in school, why no one was taking care of him. But something held her back. Maybe it was the peaceful way he interacted with Whiskers, or the careful way he rationed his meager food supply. This wasn't a dangerous situation, it was a heartbreaking one. The boy finished writing and closed the notebook. He looked at Whiskers, who was now curled up on what appeared to be a makeshift bed of old blankets. "I miss her, Whiskers," the boy said quietly. "I keep thinking she's going to come back, that she's just working late or something. But it's been almost a 2-month now." Margaret's heart clenched. A month. This child had been alone for a 2-month. "I know I should go to the police or something," the boy continued, "but what if they can't find her? What if they put me in foster care and we never see each other again? At least here, I can wait for her. At least here, I'm still home." The boy's voice cracked on the last word, and Margaret had to bite her lip to keep from crying out loud. She was witnessing the loyalty of a child who refused to give up hope, even in impossible circumstances. But she was also seeing a young man slowly starving, living in conditions that no one should have to endure. Whiskers seemed to sense the boy's sadness. He got up from his bed and climbed into the boy's lap, purring loudly and nuzzling against his chin. "Thanks, buddy," the boy whispered. "At least I've got you." Margaret made her decision. She stepped out from behind the shrub and knocked gently on the shed door. The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. The boy scrambled to his feet, terror written across his face, clutching Cat to his chest as if he could protect them both. "Please don't call the police," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just waiting for my mom to come back." please." Margaret's heart broke all over again. This child's first instinct wasn't anger or defiance, it was fear and pleading. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I'm not going to call the police. I'm Margaret. I live on Maple Street. I think Whiskers has been visiting my house." The boy's eyes widened with recognition. "You're the lady. You're the one who's been feeding him." "I am," Margaret confirmed. "And you're the one who's been sending me those beautiful gifts. What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I know they're not much, but I wanted to pay you back somehow. You've been so kind to Whiskers, and I don't have any money. My name is Sam." "Sam, how long have you been living out here?" 42 days, he answered immediately. "But it's okay. My mom will be back soon. She had to go away for work. She'll be back." Margaret could hear the desperate hope in his voice, the way he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "Sam," she said carefully, "when was the last time you heard from your mom?" The question hung in the air between them. Sam's face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a scared, lonely child. 6 weeks ago, he whispered. "She went to Portland for a job interview. She was supposed to be back in 3 days. But then she stopped answering her phone, and the hotel said she never checked out, and..." His voice broke completely, and Margaret watched as this brave young man finally allowed himself to fall apart. Without thinking, Margaret stepped into the shed and wrapped her arms around Sam and Whiskers both. The boy was so thin she could feel his ribs through his shirt, and he smelled like he hadn't had access to a proper shower in weeks. "It's okay," she murmured, the same way she'd comforted her own children years ago. "It's going to be okay." Sam sobbed against her shoulder, months of suppressed fear and loneliness pouring out of him. Whiskers, caught between them, purred louder than Margaret had ever heard him purr, as if he knew his two favorite humans had finally found each other. When Sam's sobs finally quieted, Margaret pulled back and looked at him seriously. "Sam, we need to find your mother. And we need to get you somewhere safe and warm. Will you let me help you?" Sam wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What if she comes back and I'm not here? What if she can't find me?" "Then we'll make sure she knows where you are," Margaret said firmly. "But sweetheart, you can't keep living like this. You're just a child." "I'm 12, Sam protested weakly. "You're 12 and you're alone and you're scared," Margaret corrected gently. "There's no shame in needing help." Over the next hour, the full story emerged. Sam's mother, Linda Anderson, was a single parent who had been struggling to find steady work since losing her job at a local factory. When she heard about a potential position in Portland that could change their lives, she'd used their last bit of savings to make the trip. She was supposed to return home on a Wednesday. When Wednesday came and went with no word, Sam initially wasn't worried. Job interviews sometimes led to unexpected opportunities. But days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The hotel confirmed she had checked in but never checked out, and her room had been cleared by housekeeping. "The worst part started 3 weeks ago," Sam continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The power in the house got shut off first, then the water." He trailed off, looking ashamed. "So you can't shower or use the bathroom at home?" Margaret asked gently. Sam shook his head. "The house is so dark and cold now. I sleep there sometimes, but during the day, this shed is warmer. And there's a public bathroom at the library where I can, But I haven't been able to shower in weeks." Margaret's heart broke all over again. At 12 years old, Sam was old enough to take care of himself for a few days, but not old enough to navigate the complex systems of missing persons reports and police investigations, and certainly not old enough to live without basic utilities. He was terrified that if he reported his mother missing, he'd be placed in foster care and separated from everything familiar, including his cat. So he'd made the decision to wait. He'd been getting by on the small amount of cash his mother had left for groceries, supplemented by food from the local library's free meal program and the kindness of strangers who didn't realize they were helping a homeless teenager. "I kept thinking she'd walk through the door any day," Sam explained to Margaret as they sat in the shed with curled up between them. "I kept thinking if I just waited a little longer." "But Whiskers found me," Margaret said, understanding dawning on her. "Or rather, you discovered Whiskers had found me." Sam nodded, looking embarrassed again. "He started spending time at your house about 2 weeks ago. I followed him one day and saw you feeding him, giving him water. You were so kind to him, and he seemed so happy there. I thought maybe I could help him have a better life, even if I couldn't help myself. So you started sending gifts through him." "I wanted to pay you back," Sam said simply. "You were taking better care of Whiskers than I could. The least I could do was try to give you something in return. I know they're just toys and things I found, but they were all I had." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd learned. This young man had been facing an impossible situation with a maturity and moral compass that amazed her. Even in his darkest hour, his instinct had been to give rather than take, sharing his few precious possessions with someone who was helping his beloved cat. "Sam," she said finally, "I want you to come home with me tonight. We're going to get you a hot meal and a warm bed, and tomorrow we're going to figure out how to find your mother." Sam's eyes filled with tears again. "I can't pay you. I don't have anything left to give you." Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. "Sweetheart, you've already given me more than you know. You've given me a purpose. You've reminded me what it feels like to be needed." Since Harold's death, Margaret had been existing rather than living. Her days had become a routine of solitude, morning coffee, afternoon television, early bedtimes in an empty house. She'd been slowly disappearing into herself, becoming invisible even to her own neighbors. But Sam's crisis had awakened something in her that she thought was gone forever, the fierce protectiveness of someone who has something precious to care for. That night, for the first time in months, Margaret's house felt like a home again. Sam took his first hot shower in weeks, gave him clean clothes that had belonged to her late husband, and prepared a meal that was the first proper dinner he'd had in over a month. Whiskers supervised from his new favorite chair, clearly pleased that his two favorite humans were finally in the same place. Over dinner, they made plans. The next morning, they would contact the Portland police to file a missing person report for Linda Anderson. Margaret had connections at the local social services office through her volunteer work years ago. She would call in favors to ensure Sam could stay with her rather than being placed in emergency foster care. More importantly, they would work together to find Linda. "She's out there somewhere," Margaret told Sam as he finally began to relax in the warmth and safety of her living room. "And we're going to bring her home." But the story was far from over. The search for Linda Anderson would take them on a journey neither of them expected, uncovering a truth that would test their newfound bond and challenge everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and love. It began with a phone call that came 3 days later. Margaret was making breakfast while Sam sat at her kitchen table, looking healthier than he had in weeks, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Portland area code. "Hello?" Margaret answered, her heart immediately racing. "Is this Margaret Caldwell?" asked a woman's voice, professional but kind. "Yes, this is she. My name is Detective Sarah Ashcroft with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling about a missing person report you filed for Linda Anderson. Is Samuel Anderson with you? Margaret looked at Sam, whose face had gone white at hearing his mother's name. Yes, Margaret said carefully. He's right here. Have you found Linda? There was a pause that lasted forever. Ma'am, I think it would be best if we discussed this in person. Could you and Samuel come to Portland? There are some things about Linda's disappearance that we need to discuss with you both. Margaret's blood turned to ice. Detective Ashcroft, is Linda alive? Another pause. Ma'am, I really think it would be better if we talked in person. Can you make the trip? Margaret looked at Sam, who was now standing beside her, his hands shaking. We'll be there tomorrow, Margaret said. The drive to Portland was the longest 3 hours of both their lives. Sam stared out the window without speaking, while Margaret's mind raced through every possible scenario. When they arrived at the Portland Police Department, Detective Ashcroft met them at the front desk. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Margaret on edge. In her experience, people were only that gentle when they were about to deliver devastating news. They were led to a small conference room where Detective Ashcroft spread several files across the table. Samuel, she said gently, I need to ask you some questions about your mother. When was the last time you spoke with her? 6 weeks ago, Sam replied, his voice barely above a whisper. She called me from her hotel room the night she arrived in Portland. She said the job interview was the next morning, and she'd call me after it was over. Detective Ashcroft nodded, making notes. And you never heard from her again? No. Her phone went straight to voicemail after that. Detective Ashcroft opened one of the files and pulled out a photograph. Samuel, is this your mother? It was a driver's license photo of a woman in her 40s with Sam's same brown eyes and gentle smile. Yes, Sam said immediately. That's her. Have you found her? Is she okay? Detective Ashcroft exchanged a look with Margaret that made her stomach drop. Samuel, your mother was in an accident. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sam's face crumpled, and Margaret instinctively reached for his hand. She was hit by a drunk driver on her way back from the job interview, Detective Ashcroft continued gently. She was in a coma for more than 5 weeks. She only woke up 2 days ago. Margaret's mind reeled. She's alive? She's alive, Detective Ashcroft confirmed. But she's been unconscious this entire time. She had no identification when she was brought in, her purse was lost in the accident. We've been trying to identify her for weeks. Sam was crying now, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief rather than despair. Can I see her? He asked desperately. Is she going to be okay? She's going to make a full recovery, Detective Ashcroft said with a smile. And yes, you can see her. She's been asking for you nonstop since she woke up. She's been absolutely frantic with worry. The reunion between Sam and his mother was something Margaret would remember for the rest of her life. Linda Anderson was still weak from her injuries and weeks of unconsciousness, but the moment she saw Sam walk into her hospital room, strength seemed to flow back into her body. She sobbed as she held her son, apologizing over and over for leaving him alone, for not being there, for making him worry. I thought you'd left me, Sam whispered against her shoulder. I thought you decided you didn't want me anymore. Never, Linda said fiercely. Never, sweetheart. I would never leave you. I tried so hard to wake up, to call you, to let you know I was okay. I've been going crazy wondering what happened to you. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching the reunion with tears streaming down her face. This was what she had helped make possible. This was why Whiskers had chosen her. But Linda's next words surprised everyone. "Sam," she said, looking past her son to Margaret, "who is this woman? And why do I feel like I owe her my life?" Over the next hour, Sam told his mother everything. About living in the shed, about Margaret's kindness to Whiskers, about the gifts he'd sent through the cat, about Margaret finding him and bringing him home. Linda listened with growing amazement and gratitude, looking at Margaret as if she were seeing an angel. "You saved my son," she said simply when Sam finished his story. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Margaret replied. "Sam saved himself. And honestly, he saved me too." It was true. In the weeks since finding Sam, Margaret had felt more alive than she had since Harold's death. She had purpose again, people who needed her, a reason to get up in the morning. "I don't understand," Linda said. Margaret smiled, looking at Sam with genuine affection. "I've been lonely for a long time. But Sam gave me something to care about again. He reminded me that I still had something to offer the world." The recovery process was long but joyful. Linda had to stay in the hospital for several more weeks, undergoing physical therapy and treatment for her injuries. During this time, Sam stayed with Margaret, and their bond deepened into something that resembled a grandmother-grandchild relationship. Margaret helped Sam catch up on the schoolwork he'd missed, drove him to visit his mother every day, and slowly watched him transform from a scared, desperate child back into a normal teenager with hopes and dreams for the future. Whiskers, meanwhile, seemed to understand that his mission was complete. He stopped his early morning adventures and settled into the comfortable routine of a well-loved house cat, equally at home with Margaret during the day and with Sam in the evenings. When Linda was finally released from the hospital, Margaret faced a fear she hadn't expected, the fear of being alone again. She had grown accustomed to Sam's presence in her house, to having someone to cook for and worry about. The thought of returning to her solitary existence filled her with dread. But Linda Anderson had other plans. "Margaret," she said on the day of her release, "I have a proposition for you." They were sitting in Margaret's living room, Linda in the comfortable chair by the window, Sam on the couch with Whiskers in his lap, and Margaret in her usual spot on the love seat. "The doctors say I'm going to make a full recovery, but it's going to take time. I can't work for at least another month, maybe 2. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I don't want Sam to be alone again, even for a day." Margaret nodded, not sure where this was leading. "Would you consider letting us stay here with you? Just until I'm back on my feet? We could help with expenses, and Sam could help around the house, and—" "Linda," Margaret interrupted gently, "you don't need to convince me. I was hoping you'd ask." And so began an arrangement that none of them had planned but all of them needed. Linda and Sam moved into Margaret's guest rooms, and the house that had been too quiet for too long suddenly filled with the sounds of family, conversations over breakfast, laughter in the evenings, the comfortable chaos of people who cared about each other sharing space. Margaret rediscovered the joy of cooking for others, of having someone to worry about, of being needed. Linda found the stability and support she'd been struggling to provide alone. And Sam, for the first time in his life, experienced what it was like to have not just a mother, but an extended family. For the first time in years, Margaret's last thought before sleep wasn't about the day that had passed, but about the day that was coming. Do your pets bring you strange presents? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.